Behind the makeup, the camera tricks, and the tightly controlled press releases, many beloved stars lived with disabilities, disfigurements, or chronic illnesses that were carefully hidden from the public eye. For some, these conditions were lifelong secrets. For others, they were painful consequences of studio negligence. Here are 13 vintage Hollywood stars who lived with secret deformities and disabilities that the industry worked tirelessly to conceal. June Allison. Long before she danced across the screen in musicals and heartwarming dramas, June Allison faced a childhood accident that could have ended her life, let alone her career. At just 8 years old, she was crushed beneath a falling tree branch while riding her bicycle in the Bronx. The injury shattered her spine and left her paralyzed from the waist down. Doctors gave a grim prognosis, warning she might never walk again. For over 4 years, June endured an isolating and painful recovery. She wore a rigid steel brace that locked her torso in place, preventing her from even sitting up without help. Her early years were spent not in playgrounds or classrooms, but in hospital beds and darkened rooms. Her mother, desperate to lift her spirits, introduced her to the wonder of movies. The silver screen became a lifeline, sparking in June a dream that would shape the rest of her life. Miraculously, Allison did regain her ability to walk, though her back remained permanently fragile. When she entered show business, first as a dancer and later as an actress, she carried with her the memory and the pain of those years. But Hollywood had no place for weakness. Her spinal trauma was buried under studio-crafted biographies that painted her as the wholesome, healthy girl next door. Allison never disclosed her condition during her career, afraid that the truth might end it. Her breezy persona masked chronic pain, which she managed privately throughout her adult life. The musical numbers she performed so joyfully came at a physical cost known only to her closest friends. In later interviews, Allison began to open up about her past, not to gain sympathy, but to inspire others facing adversity. Buster Keaton. Buster Keaton's silent film brilliance made him an icon of early cinema, celebrated for his physical comedy and stoic expression. But behind the gags and breathtaking stunts was a man whose body bore the scars of a dangerous profession. Hollywood billed him as indestructible, a comic daredevil who seemed immune to pain. In truth, Keaton's career was shaped by one injury that nearly ended his life, and nobody knew it until years later. While filming a scene for Sherlock Jr. in 1924, Keaton was hit by a torrent of water from a spout on a moving train. The force threw him backward onto the steel rails. The take was completed without hesitation, and Keaton, ever the professional, brushed himself off and kept filming. But what he didn't know at the time was that he had fractured his neck. It wasn't until years later, during a routine medical check, that doctors found the healed vertebrae and told him how close he had come to paralysis. Throughout his life, Keaton performed nearly all of his own stunts, many of which were incredibly dangerous. He scaled buildings, crashed through windows, and leaped from moving vehicles. These sequences thrilled audiences, but there was no real safety net. If he was injured, he worked through it. Studios never publicized the risks. They wanted their stars to appear invincible. Keaton, in turn, felt compelled to maintain the illusion. The damage to his neck led to chronic discomfort and limited movement in later years. He also suffered from recurring migraines and spinal issues, consequences of a career built on controlled chaos. Yet, he rarely complained and never publicly acknowledged the toll it took. Even in his later interviews, Keaton spoke fondly of the physical comedy he helped pioneer, never once revealing the price. Today, his legacy is one of genius, but also of silent suffering, masked by laughter and grace. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift's expressive features and soulful gaze made him a cinematic icon. Yet beneath that composed exterior lay a body altered forever by a tragic accident that would define both his career and health. On the evening of May 12, 1956, after attending a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift veered off a winding Beverly Hills road and crashed into a telephone pole. Actor Kevin McCarthy found him trapped in the wreckage with severe facial trauma. Taylor herself reportedly removed 2 broken teeth embedded in his tongue before he was rushed to hospital. Clift suffered multiple injuries: broken jaw, fractured sinuses, shattered cheekbones, broken nose, and concussions. After several reconstructive surgeries, he returned to finish filming Raintree County. Though studios downplayed the accident, audiences were keenly aware. Actors and critics alike noted that the left side of his face appeared immobile and aged. The physical changes marked a turning point in his career. For Clift, the crash triggered chronic pain and emotional turmoil. He increasingly relied on alcohol and prescription painkillers to endure shooting and public appearances. His decline was later described by acting teacher Robert Lewis as the longest suicide in Hollywood history. Though his technical reconstruction had been successful, studio lighting and camera angles worked overtime to minimize the visible aftermath on screen. Behind the scenes, Clift resisted the press and withdrew into privacy, refusing to conform to Hollywood's publicity machine. His mental and physical deterioration only deepened as he slipped between pain and performance. Yet he continued to deliver haunting roles in films like From Here to Eternity and Judgment at Nuremberg, channeling his inner suffering into profound artistry. In retrospect, Clift's life underscores the contrast between image and reality in classic Hollywood. His physical scars became a metaphor for emotional agony. Behind every controlled camera angle and carefully edited scene stood a man paying an invisible toll. Montgomery Clift remains one of cinema's most tragic figures, an artist whose brilliance was inextricable from pain. Veronica Lake. Veronica Lake's glamorous image masked a lifelong struggle with mental illness that studios refused to acknowledge. Born Constance Ockelman in 1922, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia around age 15, according to her mother and Lake's memoirs. That diagnosis accompanied frequent mood swings, paranoia, and intense emotional collapse during her teens. Lake's early rise was meteoric. Films such as Sullivan's Travels and I Married a Witch made her an icon alongside Alan Ladd. Her hairstyle became a cultural touchstone. But in the late 1940s, the demands of fame triggered deeper instability. She clashed with directors, disappeared mid-production, and became known as difficult on set. Rather than address her condition, studios tagged her temperament as unprofessional behavior. She turned to alcohol in an effort to stifle her psychiatric suffering. Her breakdowns coincided with personal trauma, a turbulent relationship with her mother, the death of her premature child, and failed marriages. Lake's autobiography, published in 1970, revealed a woman worn down by inner demons and the pressures of Hollywood illusion. Her health declined, film offers dried up. By the early 1960s, she was reportedly working as a barmaid in New York under a pseudonym, struggling to survive physically and financially. Even after her return to low-budget films, her condition continued its quiet erosion. Veronica Lake's story is a cautionary one. She was a star who bore her illness in silence, refusing to let the public glimpse her suffering. Mental illness was stigmatized and suppressed in her era, and Lake paid the price for keeping her truth hidden. Her decline was misread as erratic behavior, when in fact it was a tragic consequence of untreated schizophrenia. John Hagen. Jane Hagen rose to fame as the unforgettable Lena Lamont in Singin' in the Rain, earning an Academy Award nomination for her shrill, comedic voice that contrasted sharply with her true vocal ability. Jean Shirley Verhagen was born in Chicago in 1923 and raised in Indiana. She studied drama at Northwestern University and entered Hollywood with a voice refined by radio and theater training. On screen, she used that training masterfully, but another side of her life was quietly unraveling alcoholism and serious health issues that began to impact her ability to work and ultimately ended her career. As the talkies rose in Hollywood, Hagen's exaggerated portrayal of Lena's cacophonous voice made irony of her true talent. Off-camera, though, she suffered from progressive drinking that led to hospital stays and blacking out during performances. Colleagues recalled that she became increasingly unreliable on set, despite the recognition she received early in her television career, including multiple Emmy nominations for Make Room for Daddy. Without public acknowledgement, her health declined sharply, her alcoholism masked by professionalism, until it could no longer be contained. By the late 1960s, Hagen's alcoholism had led to severe complications, including coma and hospitalization. She later developed esophageal cancer, which claimed her life in 1977 at the age of 54. Despite the tragic end, Jean Hagen's legacy rests on her brilliance in Singin' in the Rain and the rare poignancy of a woman whose health struggles were invisible to the public until it was too late. Her story is one of invisible impairment, a star whose decline was quietly erased until only her performances remained. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi's iconic portrayal of Dracula cast a long shadow over his later years. The Hungarian-born actor began suffering from chronic sciatica, stemming from injuries during his wartime service early in his Hollywood tenure. Initially treated with aspirin or benign therapies, his pain intensified, leading to extended use of morphine and methadone. Over time, his legitimate medical need was reshaped into a dependency the studios used to sideline him from major roles. By the late 1940s, Lugosi's mobility was visibly impaired. He accepted fewer A-list films and was frequently cast in roles where he could sit or hide behind a cloak. His legend became more a burden than a boon. His dependency on opiates expanded gradually, cutting deeply into his opportunities. Directors were cautious of his reputation, and his requests for non-horror roles went largely unanswered. His physical and medical condition became inseparable from his public persona as more of a tragic icon than a commanding actor. In the early 1950s, Lugosi checked into a rehab clinic to address his dependence. Reports indicate he underwent treatment in 1955, completing a 3-month detox. Though he emerged sober and hopeful, the rehabilitation did little to restore his career. He continued performing in low-budget films and stage tours of Dracula, often appearing as a nostalgic ghost of his former self. He died in 1956, reportedly wearing his Dracula cape, a final gesture to the character that defined him. Lugosi's legacy is inseparable from both his cinematic triumph and the hidden toll of an injury that became a lifelong affliction. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was once heralded as one of the most promising actresses of her generation. With a face made for close-ups and a spirit that refused to conform, she captivated audiences in films like Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range. But behind the applause was a woman struggling with her own mind and with a system unequipped and unwilling to care for it. In the early 1940s, after a series of confrontations with studio executives and legal troubles, Frances was declared mentally ill. She was institutionalized, sometimes involuntarily, and subjected to brutal treatments. For decades, the public believed she had been lobotomized, a myth that took hold after William Arnold's sensationalized 1978 biography, Shadowland. But medical records now confirm no such procedure was performed. Still, the truth was horrifying in its own right. Frances endured years inside Washington state mental institutions, where she was forcibly drugged, restrained, and subjected to electroshock therapy done without consent. She also claimed to have been physically abused and assaulted while institutionalized, though those stories were often dismissed or silenced at the time. Her mother had legal control over her medical decisions, and biographers later criticized her role in prolonging Frances's confinement. The studios, eager to avoid scandal, stepped away entirely, effectively abandoning one of their brightest stars. In interviews after her release, Frances spoke with cool clarity about the horrors she had lived through. Though she eventually returned to the stage and small screen, Frances was never the same. Her final years were quiet, marked by introspection and distance from the Hollywood that had once adored her. She died in 1970 at the age of 56. What makes Frances Farmer's case so chilling is not only the suffering she endured, but how easily it was concealed beneath the glamour of old Hollywood. Her life reminds us how quickly a star could be discarded and how silence was often more valued than truth. Clifton Webb. Clifton Webb became synonymous with grace, wit, and upper-crust charm in films like Laura and Sitting Pretty, often playing refined bachelors or sardonic intellectuals. Born in 1889, he entered show business early, mastering dance, music, and stage performance before transitioning to film. But few audiences realized that by the time of his major Hollywood success, Webb was silently battling severe arthritis. His elegant bearing and controlled movements were not just artistic choices, they were strategic ways to mask physical pain that intensified as he aged. As the years progressed, Webb's joint pain, particularly in his hips and knees, limited his mobility. He reportedly suffered from chronic inflammation that made walking difficult and standing for long periods nearly impossible, Directors adapted by filming him seated or stationary whenever possible. On set, he used canes or rested between takes, though these aids were carefully kept out of sight. His dignified posture and clipped delivery created an illusion of strength. But in private, Webb coped with increasing discomfort. He never disclosed his condition publicly, and studio biographies omitted any reference to his health struggles. Even as arthritis curtailed his physical freedom, Webb refused to let it end his career. He continued acting well into his 70s, relying on discipline and carefully managed routines. He maintained his charm in interviews and public appearances, never acknowledging the toll his body had taken. Those close to him described a man of enormous pride who refused to be pitied or perceived as weak. When he died in 1966, the press remembered him as a symbol of classic sophistication, unaware that much of that poise had been forged through resilience and pain. Lionel Barrymore. Lionel Barrymore, patriarch of one of Hollywood's most revered acting dynasties, left a lasting impression in roles like Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life and Dr. Gillespie in the Dr. Kildare series. Yet many fans never knew the reason he spent most of his later career in a wheelchair. Barrymore had suffered a broken hip in 1938, and while the injury healed poorly, it coincided with the progression of debilitating arthritis. The combination left him permanently reliant on a wheelchair for the last 17 years of his life. Despite the physical challenges, Barrymore remained astonishingly productive. MGM adapted to his condition, offering him seated roles and reworking scripts to accommodate his immobility. He used a wheelchair in character long before that was common, turning what could have been a career-ending obstacle into a seamless part of his screen identity. The studio avoided drawing attention to his disability in publicity materials. They framed him as an elder statesman of the screen, full of wisdom and strength, without acknowledging the chronic pain he endured daily. Barrymore never publicly complained about his condition. Instead, he worked diligently through discomfort, channeling his energy into powerful vocal performances and nuanced acting. He once joked that the wheelchair suited his cantankerous old man character. Off-screen, however, the disease deeply affected his mobility and independence. Friends and biographers later noted that he kept his suffering private, fearing it might undermine the public's perception of him. When he passed away in 1954, tributes poured in for the man who had defined so many classic roles, but few knew the extent to which he had acted through pain. Lionel Barrymore's resilience allowed him to continue performing when others might have faded into memory, proving that even behind a wheelchair, strength can take many forms. Claraba Bose. Claraba Bose burst onto the screen in the silent era and quickly became the ultimate flapper, vivacious, flirtatious, and carefree. Known as the original It Girl, she captivated audiences in films like Wings and It. But behind her bright smile and bobbed hair was a painful history few ever learned. Bose grew up in extreme poverty in Brooklyn, New York, with a schizophrenic mother who once tried to kill her. As a teenager, she witnessed sexual abuse, endured hunger, and faced emotional instability that left lasting psychological scars. Her behavior later in life, marked by anxiety, intense mood swings, and self-isolation, suggested deep-seated trauma. Hollywood, however, preferred to market her as carefree and spontaneous, masking the emotional damage beneath the surface. At the height of her fame, Clara's mental health began to falter under the crushing weight of publicity and exploitation. She suffered severe nervous breakdowns and was often labeled difficult by studio executives. Bose reportedly had panic attacks on set and struggled to memorize lines due to anxiety. Rather than receive proper medical care, she was managed through studio interference and threats. The studios fed rumors about her promiscuity and moral failings, choosing to sensationalize her breakdowns rather than provide compassion or support. By 1933, at just 28, she left Hollywood altogether, unable to cope with the pressure any longer. Claraba Bose spent the rest of her life out of the public eye, living in seclusion and grappling with what biographers believe was undiagnosed bipolar disorder. She had intermittent hospitalizations, but her mental health was never fully addressed in her lifetime. She died in 1965, having long since disappeared from the spotlight she once dominated. Bose's story is a haunting example of how Hollywood consumed its brightest stars without regard for their emotional well-being. Her on-screen sparkle masked a life marred by neglect, abuse, and untreated illness realities buried by a system that only wanted the illusion of joy. Margaret Hamilton. Margaret Hamilton became one of cinema's most iconic villains when she portrayed the Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz. Her performance terrified generations of children, and her cackling laugh and green makeup became cultural landmarks. But few knew that during production, she endured a near-fatal accident that left her permanently scarred. While filming the witch's fiery exit from Munchkinland, a trapdoor malfunctioned. The pyrotechnics ignited too soon, and Hamilton's copper-based green makeup caught fire. She suffered second-degree burns on her face and third-degree burns on her hands, requiring 6 weeks of hospitalization and skin grafts. Despite the severity of her injuries, the studio pressured her to return to set without publicizing the incident. MGM executives feared that revealing the accident would damage the film's joyful image. Hamilton refused to allow a stunt double to perform dangerous scenes afterward, a demand that led to tension with the crew. She wore gloves in subsequent scenes to conceal the scarring on her hands. While makeup artists covered the burns on her face, the trauma remained. She never filed a lawsuit, choosing instead to maintain her professional reputation in an industry where women were easily discarded. Hamilton later spoke of the accident with characteristic understatement, referring to the pain as just part of the job. But she also admitted the experience left her cautious and deeply shaken. She continued to act in film, television, and stage productions, often cast in roles that referenced her witchy past. Privately, she carried both emotional and physical scars for the rest of her life. Margaret Hamilton passed away in 1985 at the age of 82. Her story is a chilling reminder of how Hollywood concealed injuries and demanded silence from its performers. Behind the Wicked Witch was a woman who endured fire, pain, and professional pressure to maintain the magic on screen. Susan Peters. Susan Peters was on the brink of stardom when tragedy struck. Born in 1921, she quickly gained attention for her sensitive performances in films like Random Harvest, for which she received an Academy Award nomination. Her future seemed limitless until a hunting trip in 1945 changed everything. While retrieving a rifle, it accidentally discharged, striking her in the spine and paralyzing her from the waist down. She was just 23. In an instant, Hollywood's next leading lady became a quadriplegic. The incident shocked the industry, but the public received only sanitized updates, and much of her suffering was kept out of view. Despite her devastating injury, Peters refused to vanish from the screen. She returned to acting in a 1946 film called The Sign of the Ram, playing a wheelchair-bound woman. Critics praised her courage, but the film's reception was lukewarm. Studios were unwilling to invest in a star who required accommodations. No major roles followed. Instead of adapting Hollywood to her needs, executives quietly stepped back. Peters also turned to radio and the stage, but her physical limitations and the emotional toll of isolation made sustained work nearly impossible. She faded from the spotlight, a star whom the system simply did not know how to support. Her personal life deteriorated along with her health. Her marriage collapsed under the strain, and she reportedly struggled with depression and malnutrition. By 1952, she had lost the will to eat. She died that same year, just 31 years old. The coroner listed her cause of death as kidney failure, though friends believed she had essentially starved herself. Susan Peters' story is one of courage, yes, but also of abandonment. Hollywood had no place for visible disability, no blueprint for making space where the image of perfection reigned supreme. She had talent, drive, and dignity, but none of that could save her from being discarded when she could no longer play the part the industry demanded. Carole Lombard. Carole Lombard rose to fame in the early 1930s as Hollywood's reigning queen of screwball comedy, dazzling audiences with her wit and vivacious screen presence in films like My Man Godfrey and To Be or Not to Be. Born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, she endured her parents' separation as a child and quietly supported herself with modeling and bit parts before landing starring roles. In October 1927, a serious automobile accident left Lombard with deep lacerations across her left cheek and eye when the windshield shattered. Fearful that visible scars would derail her blossoming career, she underwent reconstructive surgery and spent painstaking hours under makeup to disguise the faint ridges and discoloration that remained. Behind the scenes, studio makeup artists perfected specialized lighting setups and cosmetic blends to keep her complexion flawless on film. Whenever she sensed a camera might betray her injury, Lombard would attribute absences to exhaustion or creative breaks, slipping away until her appearance met the studio's exacting standards. Though she concealed both the physical and emotional aftermath of the crash, Lombard's resilience shone through every performance. Her determination to appear untouched by pain underscores the extreme lengths to which stars went to uphold Hollywood's illusion of perfection, and reminds us of the hidden costs borne by those who once seemed untouchable. Thanks for watching. If these hidden deformities and disabilities of vintage Hollywood stars moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell for more untold stories from the golden era. Know of another star whose secret struggle was buried by Hollywood? Let us know in the comments. We're always listening.